Hi everyone, in case you missed me doing this live, this is the first installment of my weekly series, Chapter 1. I'm doing these short book readings and discussions on Monday nights at 7:30. They're going to be on Zoom and Facebook Live. Everything I talked about is linked in the bio of this video, including my weekly cheat sheet. Come join me on Monday nights. Feedback and questions are welcome. I'll be responding to each and every one in the comments section down below. Enjoy. You ready? Hi everyone, it's Robert Rotenberg here. Welcome to my first reading that I've named Chapter 1. For the next 5 Monday nights, I want to talk about the opening chapters of my first 5 novels. But to be clear, this is not about me promoting my novels. I'm using my chapters to illustrate some key points and give you some tips so how you can learn about your own good writing. Let's do a few quick notes. 1, I'm determined that each session should last no more than 20 minutes, hopefully 15. Then if you want to stick around, and I'll answer some questions. My daughter, who some of you have seen, Helen, is beside me. She's going to moderate. Any questions or comments, or tell me if I'm mumbling or if I'm talking too fast, too loud, too soft. Send it to Helen and she'll tell me. Hi, Cheryl. A plug for my computer guy, Matthew Arbide. You put this all together. Thanks, Matt. Going to help us throw this up on YouTube later. I'm going to prepare a one-page kind of cheat sheet after this. If you send us your email address, I'll be happy to send it out to you. And next week, a few days before, I'm going to send you out some things to look at, short things to read or look at, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, let's get at it. I can still see myself sitting at my desk in grade 5 at Glen Rush Public School when a teacher taught us the poem, The Highwayman. I remember, I'm talking too loud. I remember when she finished reading it, I thought to myself for the first time in my life, I want to be a writer. Since this talk is about openings, here is the first stanza of this classic poem that so captivated me, then and now. You ready? The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed up on cloudy seas. Slow down. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and a highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. Why am I starting with a poem? If you have a pen in your hand, write down these 5 letters, or just remember them. C-A-V-E-S, caves. Keep these 5 letters in your head and by your computer every time you write everything. That's the theme of this talk. They stand for what I think are the 5 key elements that you need to start a story, to write an email, to send a memo, any and everything you're going to say or write. Let's take the S and move it up to the top. I wish there was a word called staves. S stands for setting. We could talk all day about setting. Time of day, time of year, location, but the key is the reader needs to know where the story takes place. The moon was a ghostly galleon. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. I get hired often by aspiring writers or lawyers or business people to improve their writing. And inevitably, after about a page, I write in capital letters. But where am I? Where are we? That's S. Now jump to the top, and the next letter is C. You could probably guess what that is. It's character. Books, films, everything you read, everything you see, everything you write, they're all about people. Here's an important note. People don't stand alone. They have families, they have friends, they have colleagues, they have the guy at the coffee shop they see every week. So when you're writing about a character, you have to write about their own setting, who they are, where they live, and who the people are in their lives. Because it's the people in their lives and the places that they go. That's what define them as a character. Next comes A, action. Something has to happen. There's always a tricky balance between character and action. If your character is jumping out of a helicopter in paragraph 1 and you don't know who she is, you're not going to care about her. Let me go back to Highwayman for a minute. This is what happens in stanza 3 when he arrives at the end. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. Now at the end, I'm going to give you a link on YouTube where you can go and you can hear it read. But the point is, that's everything you need to know. It's character, action, and setting, and tension. We know something's going to happen. The last two letters are V and E. They're more subtle points, and I'm going to talk about them more in depth next week. But V stands for voice, writing inside the character. Now, when I read the chapter of Old City Hall, keep an eye out for words and phrases that I use that this character uses, distinct lines that he would say that you and I probably wouldn't say. E is the last one. It's my idea. I call it emotion. Now, I admit it. I'm an emotional writer. I like to ask readers three things. Did you laugh? Did you cry? Did the pages turn? Again, it's all about making your readers care. Okay, so time to get to the book. Chapter 1. The novel, some of you have seen it. And don't worry, I'm not going to, oh, there we go. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read parts and we're going to talk about it a little bit. But it's pretty boring just having an author read a book from start to beginning, start to end. Chapter 1, Old City Hall. Much to the shock of his family, Mr. Singh rather enjoyed delivering newspapers. Who would have thought that Gurdial Singh, former chief engineer for Indian Railways, the largest transportation company in the world, would be dropping newspapers at people's doors, commencing at 5:05 each morning. He didn't need to work, but since coming to Toronto 4 years earlier, he had absolutely insisted on it, no matter that he was turning 74 years old on Thursday next. Yes, it was a silly little job. There we go, sorry. Yes, it was a silly little job. Mr. Singh was forced to concede to his wife Bimal and their 3 daughters, but he liked it. Now, I always ask people at the end for the first paragraph, are you in or you out? And I think the only way to get someone in, thank you Terry for nodding, is if you care about the character. That's why Mr. Singh was humming an old Hindi tune to himself as he walked briskly through the early morning darkness on a cold Monday morning, the 17th of December. He entered the marble-appointed lobby of the Marketplace Tower, a luxury condominium on Front Street, and gave a friendly wave to Mr. Rashid, the night concierge. The Globe and Mail newspapers were neatly stacked just inside the door beside a diminutive plastic Christmas tree. Mr. Singh, how strange, in a country covered in forest, that they would use plastic trees, Mr. Singh thought, as he hitched up his gray flannel pants and bent down to cut the binding cord with his pocket knife. He sorted the papers into 12 piles, one for each floor, on his route. It had been easy to memorize which residents took a paper, and it was a simple matter to walk down the deserted hallways and drop one squarely at each door. Now I have a little bit of homework for all of you. I'd like you to write out in 4 or 5 lines what you think Mr. Singh looks like. Not his attitude. You don't have to say he's persnickety or he's careful, but what he looks like. How tall he is, what's his facial hair, how much he weighs. Please do that, and we'll talk about that next week. The solitude was very nice, so unlike the clutter of Delhi. When he arrived at the top floor, Mr. Singh knew he would see the one person who was always awake, Mr. Kevin something. Mr. Singh could never remember Mr. Kevin's last name, even though the gentleman was one of the most famous people in Canada. There he would be, in his shabby bathrobe, a cigarette cupped in his right hand, a mug of tea in his left, scratching his gray beard with his shoulder, anxiously awaiting his morning paper. Mr. Kevin was a host of a morning radio show that was broadcast across the country. Mr. Singh had tried to listen to it a few times, but it was just a lot of chatter about fishing in Newfoundland, fiddle music in the Ottawa Valley, and farming on the prairies. These Canadians were funny people. Most of them lived in cities, but all they seemed to discuss was the countryside. Mr. Kevin, despite his unkempt appearance, was very much a gentleman, rather shy. Mr. Singh enjoyed the ritual conversation they had each morning. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Singh, Mr. Kevin always said. Good morning, Mr. Kevin, Mr. Singh always said in reply. And how is your beautiful wife? More beautiful than ever, Mr. Singh. Mr. Kevin would say, putting the cigarette in his mouth. He'd open his palm and pass an orange slice over to Mr. Singh. Thank you, Mr. Singh would say, giving Mr. Kevin his newspapers. Freshly sliced, Mr. Kevin would answer. Then they'd follow up with a short discussion about gardening or cooking or tea. Despite all he must have had on his mind, Mr. Kevin never seemed rushed. It was simply courteous and respectful conversation, an ungodly hour, quite civilized. Okay, now at this point, I've kind of slipped into the past. It's time to move into the present, and it's time to get back to action, and something happens. But look at what we've established already. Mr. Singh has a knife. Mr. Kevin has freshly sliced, obviously has a knife, an orange, and we know he has a beautiful wife. Now, look at your readers, you know something's going to happen. It took the usual 25 minutes for Mr. Singh to methodically work his way up to the 12th floor. There were only 2 suites on the floor. Mr. Kevin's suite 12A was to the left, around the bend, near the end of a long corridor. The resident to the right, an older lady who lived alone, took the other paper, which he always delivered last. Mr. Singh arrived at Mr. Kevin's door, and as usual, was halfway open. But there was no sign of Mr. Kevin. I could just leave the newspaper here, Mr. Singh thought, but then he'd miss their daily conversation. He waited for a moment. Of course he could not knock. That would be highly improper. Humming louder, he shuffled his feet, hoping to make enough noise to announce his arrival. Still, no one came. He hesitated. It was the engineer in him. See, this is his character. He liked routine, order. He remembered the day his 12th form mathematics teacher taught the class that there was no such thing as parallel lines, that because the earth was round, 2 parallel lines would eventually meet. Mr. Singh didn't sleep for a week. There was a noise from inside the apartment, an odd hollow sound. That was strange. Then a door closed. Good, he thought as he waited. But there was silence again. Maybe he should leave. Now at this point, I want to put the reader right inside him, because he's got to make decisions. Is he going to stay? Is he going to leave? Now we all know he's not going to leave. It wouldn't be a very good book if he left. But I want you to be inside him. Instead, he took Mr. Kevin's newspaper and dropped it onto the parquet floor, just outside the door. It landed with a loud smack, which he hoped would signal his presence in the doorway. He'd never done anything like that before. There was another noise inside, distant. Were they footsteps? What should he do? He certainly could not enter. Mr. Singh waited. For the first time, now, it's really, really important when you're building up tension, and next week I want to talk more about tension and suspense, to hold back. Don't just rush into it. A great writer said once, hurry up the description, slow down the action. And now, even though this is very subtle action, it's still action. And for him, it's big action, because he's never done this before. Mr. Singh waited. For the first time, he looked down at the front page of the newspaper. there's a picture of an ice hockey player raising his arms in the air and a story about the local hockey team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. How odd that the name was misspelled Leafs and not Leaves, and that the color of the leaf on the jersey was blue. Mr. Singh had seen lovely red and yellow maple leaves, but never a blue one. At last he heard footsteps approaching the door. Mr. Kevin came into the hallway wearing his usual bathrobe and opened the door all the way. Mr. Singh heard a soft tap as it rested on the doorstop. But where was his cigarette? His tea? Mr. Kevin was looking at his hand, rubbing his fingers. Mr. Singh noticed something red on his fingertips. Now again, don't give it away too quickly. Mr. Singh had a pleasant thought. Blood oranges. He so loved to eat them back home, and he'd recently found that they arrived in Canadian stores this time of year. Had Mr. Kevin been cutting one? Then when you come to the climax, you have to speed it up. Mr. Kevin raised his hands to the light. Mr. Singh could see the red liquid clearly now. It was thick and heavy, not thin like juice from an orange. Mr. Singh's heart began to race. It was blood. Mr. Singh opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, Mr. Kevin leaned closer. I killed her, Mr. Singh, he whispered. I killed her. End of chapter 1. I guess I can't ask you guys what you think. Well, that's my idea of lesson 1. I really want to keep them short and tight. If you want to email me back, I'd be happy to send you out a little cheat sheet that I've put together. It includes a link to a great version of The Highwayman set to song, a quote from Lewis Carroll, a short YouTube clip of the opening of an excellent TV show. I don't want to show you which one. And for you lawyers in the crowd, the first paragraph of Judgment by Lord Denning. All of them are great examples of setting character and action. And if you don't mind, send in your descriptions of Mr. Singh, because that'll be a fun thing to talk about next week. I'm going to try and send you a little advanced cheat sheet, some things to look at before. Next week we'll talk about book 2, The Guilty Plea, and I think that's it, short and sweet. If you want to stick around and send in some questions, Helen will take the questions. If not, have a good and safe week, and hopefully I'll see you next week and pass this along. This was great. We've had a huge number of participants. Thanks a lot.
So for now, if anyone has questions, they can put them in the chat on Zoom, and then if people have questions on Facebook, you can comment them.
Okay, did you hear that, everyone? Do we have any questions? It's nice to see so many of you. Hi, Greg.
Kevin Barnes says,
Yeah.
What was your inspiration for Ari Green?
The question is, what was my inspiration for Ari Green? I think the longer answer is, I grew up in a part of Toronto where my family, fortunately for me, they were quite upper middle class family. The Rotenberg family had come here in the 1890s, and my father was a successful doctor. But most of the people I went to school with, their parents were Holocaust survivors. And there's a thing sometimes writers talk about if you're one step away. Stephen Crane wrote Red Badge of Courage, and he was born 30 years after the Civil War. So I grew up in the basements in the houses of a lot of my friends. My partner now his father is a Holocaust survivor. And I've always thought the children of Holocaust survivors carry a certain wisdom and a something that a lot of us don't, and they carry the burden of their parents. They don't have grandparents, and they have a fidelity to their parents that's always really impressed me. So that was really the inspiration. I just thought that would be a really kind of interesting thing to do. Oh, I got to upgrade my, oops, Zoom, okay. Oh, I think I lost it. What did I do?
No, it's okay, you're good.
I can't see anybody now.
No, it's good, just leave it, they can see you.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question? I'd like to see them though.
Another person says, did you always know that this would be the first in a series?
Yeah, I did. I don't know why, but I just always, I'm much more interested in the characters than anything else. And the characters are just so rich. There's so much to talk about them that I couldn't imagine just writing one single book.
A bunch of people are asking, when is book 6?
Well, that's the good news, which is that I'm actually sending in the final edit tomorrow morning. And our publication date looks like early February of next year. And if these keep going and if anyone wants to do a 6th, I'd be happy to read the first chapter of number 6 if I get permission from my editor.
Helen Wilkie says, do you have a lot of information about your characters that doesn't show up in the books?
Yes. Hemingway said it's like a duck underwater. You only tell them 9 or 10%. I always know everything about not just the major characters, but the minor characters. In fact, I think many times it's more important. Sometimes I write long, long histories, who their grandparents were, their parents. It's a bit of the same thing that I've been talking about. You know, the character, the actions, what they did in their lives. I think you have to know everything. And you have to cut till you find the core of them.
Jeff on Facebook says, do you know any other writers who use Toronto as a backdrop?
I guess there's a few, but I'm not that familiar with them. And if any of you are in the TV business, I've been trying for 10 years to get a TV show made, and I like to say, when's the last time a detective series was made in Toronto that wasn't set in 1905, which of course is Murdoch. I've lately been watching the whole Bosch series, which is fantastic, and it's LA, LA, LA. So I love writing about Toronto. Toronto's a great place to write about.
Okay, here's a loaded question.
Uh-oh.
Paul Dunn says, how much editing do you do?
An absurd amount, and Paul is one of my former students. I probably spend about 80% of my time editing. Yeah, I gotta sit back. Can you get so I can see it again?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the meantime, Allison asks, is Kevin an amalgam of radio hosts or a particular host?
He's in that, like,
The inspiration behind him.
all of my books are not romantic clefts. There's no real characters in them, except for a few of the small characters. Oh my goodness. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just take a bunch of people and make them up. Although in the new book, I put 1 or 2 real characters, like people with small jobs and stuff around the city. It's nice to see a lot of you. Hi, Mrs. J. Hi, Liz.
Most of the questions are just asking about book 6, so I guess you can make a post about that later, giving everyone.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm very excited about book 6. I guess I can tell you that the working title is Downfall. And as you know, most of my books I try to write about something about that's really happening in the city. And this one is about rich and poor and homelessness in the city. Pretty hard hitting, actually.
Okay, so there's 2 similar questions, so I'll read them out, both of them. So Richmond says, do you know / outline the complete story at the outset, or does the story start out open-ended and become refined as it develops? And Catherine also says, do you know the ending before you start to write, or does the story evolve as you write?
I get asked that question all the time. I wish I could just sit down and outline a story. I start with an idea. This one, I just had the idea of Mr. Singh coming up and finding someone had been murdered in the bathtub, as you'll find out as you read the book. It only took 10 years to write, so what I found was that I was kind of searching around to try to figure it out. And what I've learned is when you get about a third of the way in the book, you kind of have to figure out who did it. So then you can kind of trace back. But no, even at the last minute, I'm still fiddling around with the plot. I think because I write that way, it gives the books more of a sense of what the detectives are going through, what the lawyers are going through. It's always kind of, lawyers call it peeling back the onion, always trying to figure out. And by the way, if you do have the book, and now that we've looked at the first paragraph, at some point look at the last paragraph, because you'll see how everything kind of circles around to that.
We have questions about how do you set the location specifically? How do you choose the locations in the book?
Because I'm writing about Toronto, I'm quite conscious about trying to write about different parts of the city. So, for example, the next book takes place in the Humber Valley, where there's a very wealthy golf course right next to a whole bunch of homeless people living in tents. And I hadn't really written about the West End before. I've written about the beach, I've written about downtown. I'm trying to kind of cover the city slowly but surely.
Okay, so we have time for, I'll give you one question, then we can do one more after this, then we can wrap it up.
Okay.
A bunch of people are asking, are you still practicing full time?
Yes, so when your crazy cousin gets arrested, please call.
All right, last call for questions. Mostly everyone's just saying thank you.
Hey, I thought everyone was going to like get bored after a few minutes. Hi, Corinne. I'm seeing all these people from my life I haven't seen for so long. Well, if you need a computer guy, Matthew's great. If you need a tutor, my daughter's tutoring math and science for high school students. So there you go.
Okay.
Boy, it looks red under these lights.
Yeah. And then a bunch of people are just asking about, you know, is there a show? Is there a movie? Asking.
I wish. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So this has been a great deal of fun. I don't want to go on too long, but I would love to send you guys a few notes, a few things to look at, so we would have kind of something more in common to talk about next week. I'll give you a hint. It's the opening of The Sopranos. Look at the first 1 minute and 40 seconds of The Sopranos, and you basically learn everything you need to know about Tony. Look where his car ends up. And I think that's a very good illustration of what I've been trying to say. I hope this helped you a lot, or a little, and be safe. See you in a week.